It's only a matter of time for Paraguay to finally become part of the 183 countries that recognize China and leave the mere 12 countries that recognize Taiwan.
Could Paraguay be Taiwan's next diplomatic ally to switch recognition to China? The U.S. backs Japan as the diplomatic clash between Beijing and Tokyo worsens. South Africa gets ready to host the G20, but not everyone invited will be attending. Plus, an innovative approach to curbing bear attacks. Good evening, and welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Eric Gao. A group of Taiwanese legislators is visiting Paraguay, as growing pro-China voices within the government there could threaten the allies' relationship. Cadence Garanto reports.
A group of cross-party Taiwanese lawmakers has landed in Paraguay, hoping to deepen ties between the country's legislatures. While meeting with their counterparts, the group called Paraguay a steadfast friend to Taiwan. It's one of just 12 countries that still maintain formal diplomatic relations with Taiwan instead of China, and the only in South America, as Beijing increasingly tries to poach Taiwan's allies in the hopes of isolating it. But experts say pro-China voices have been growing in Paraguay. One group of Paraguayan lawmakers recently visited China, and another lawmaker said this in a recent interview with Chinese state media.
It's only a matter of time for Paraguay to finally become part of the 183 countries that recognize China and leave the mere 12 countries that recognize Taiwan. The parliament is advising the president of Paraguay that we should evaluate the possibility of establishing diplomatic and commercial relations with China, reaching a consensus that aligns with the interests of all the Paraguayan people.
One expert says all of this indicates slow but widening support for a diplomatic switch, driven by pressure from agriculture and business communities in Paraguay who want access to Chinese markets, and by China-friendly opposition parties, as well as a faction within the ruling party.
While still a minority opposition, who has a pro-China sentiment is becoming more vocal and more organized, and more politically acceptable than in previous years.
This doesn't mean a switch will happen anytime soon. Experts say ties are still relatively stable now. Paraguay's president has repeatedly said he remains committed to Taiwan and indicated cutting ties is not a possibility. Last year, the country kicked out a Chinese envoy for allegedly urging the country to switch relations. There's also a lot of cooperation and exchanges. Taiwan's foreign minister was just in Paraguay in July. A Paraguayan governor is on a visit to Taiwan right now, and a delegation of Paraguayan officials recently met with Taiwan's representative to the U.S., emphasizing that bilateral relations are strong. The risk of a switch could come in the future, particularly if a China-friendly opposition party wins the presidency. This would be a huge loss for Taiwan. It has only 12 diplomatic allies left and is working hard to hang on to them. Ke says the flurry of recent visits between the two sides could be a response to this risk.
So Taiwan is reinforcing ties amid a growing China-friendly rhetoric in Paraguay's Congress, especially given that a Paraguayan opposition party delegation has recently visited China for economic and cooperation opportunities. While Taiwan's delegation, which is composed of all three parties in the Legislative Yuan, could announce new cooperation projects and offer tangible benefits to counter pro-China's economic argument within Paraguay's Congress.
So while ties may be stable now, there are warning signs for the future, meaning Taiwan may need to work even harder to shore up ties with its only ally in South America. Justin Wu and Cadence Quaranta for TaiwanPlus.
China is promising major consequences for Japan as the two countries clash over the new prime minister's statements about Taiwan. The two sides have been going back and forth for days as China demands a retraction while Japan has the backing of the U.S. Tiffany Wong reports.
No Japanese fish for China. Beijing is cutting imports, the latest in the back and forth between the two countries. It all concerns comments new Prime Minister Takaichi Sanai made earlier this month about Taiwan. She said a Chinese invasion could be grounds for Japan to mobilize its self-defense forces. Now, China says tensions are so bad there wouldn't be a market for Japanese fish, and that more consequences will come if Japan does not issue a retraction. But Japan has not backed down, lodging its own complaints against China. A since-deleted threat posted on social media by China's consul general in Osaka has especially drawn attention.
Regarding the extremely inappropriate remarks made recently by China's consul general in Osaka, Shuijian, Kensai Masaki, the director general of the Japanese Foreign Ministry's Asian Affairs Office, once again lodged a strong protest and firmly called for China to take immediate, appropriate action.
Japan sent an envoy to Beijing to try and soothe tensions, but the comments have already drawn the attention of U.S. officials, with U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee Chair Jim Risch calling the statement over the top and highly inappropriate. And the former Assistant Secretary of Defense for Indo-Pacific Security Affairs also chiming in.
The statement by the Chinese Consul General in Osaka is absolutely outrageous. Particularly in light of the political assassination of Shinzo Abe very recently, to actually threaten the life of the Prime Minister is outrageous. Japan's government is perfectly capable of making decisions on how to address that without advice from any of us, but it seems to me it should be disqualifying for future office in Japan, for sure.
Now, China is holding live-fire drills in the Yellow Sea. It's also issued a warning to Chinese citizens against travel to Japan. The U.S. House Select Committee on China also weighed in, saying that the U.S. stands with Japan against China's attempted coercion and intimidation. But China's tactics are already making an impact in Japan. Chinese visitors are the biggest group of foreign tourists there, and many have been canceling their trips, causing Japanese tourism and retail stocks to drop.
在这期间受到的影响其实非常大。昨天我们取消了大概是6件左右，占10%，然后今天是取消了大概是10件左右，综合应该是20件左右，所以占据了我们80%的市场。
Several Chinese airlines offered refunds on routes to Japan before the end of the year, and Chinese tourists already in Japan said they're worried about the relationship between the two countries.
Japan's economy really depends on tourists. I hope we can all respect each other so that things can improve for Japan, for us Chinese people, for Hong Kong, and for everyone.
My parents actually shared the news with me just literally in the morning before I came. So I felt like it's another political maybe conversation between these two countries. Because we've planned everything, so we still decided to come.
Japan has also issued its own warning for its citizens in China, urging them not to get together in places seen as gathering sites for Japanese. As the back and forth between the two countries continue, Japan's close partners, the U.S. and Taiwan, will be watching closely. Chris Ma and Tiffany Wong for TaiwanPlus.
Taiwan's main opposition Kuomintang has suspended one of its members for allegedly advocating for unification with China. He Yinglu, a member of the KMT's Central Standing Committee, had reportedly posted videos on social media praising Chinese Communist Party leaders and advocating for, quote, embracing the motherland and unification as soon as possible. Local media reports that He is a so-called Chinese spouse, referring to Chinese citizens who marry Taiwanese nationals. This comes after several Chinese spouses were deported earlier this year for posting videos advocating for unification by force. The government here has indicted 7 people, including one from Hong Kong, for their roles in alleged Chinese spy ring.
中国确实对于我们的这个渗透作为是日趋严重了哈。那对于这些有关这些有接触机密的人，我们也都要加以进行查核。事实上，这个案子也是在我们内部进行这一个查核的时候，所发现的所以我们还是会不断的精进。
This case broke when the military looked into an officer for suspicious activity. That led to the discovery of an illegal spy ring and the prosecution of 2 active military personnel. Prosecutors say the ring received more than $350,000 to support the operation. It comes amid a surge in espionage cases in Taiwan, with 168 people prosecuted on espionage charges last year. That was double the previous year and 6 times the year before that. Is Taiwan energy resilient? A forum in Taipei welcomed German energy policy experts and U.S. defense experts to discuss weaknesses in the national grid as it faces threats from China.
Of course, nuclear energy is more independent than fossil fuels, for exactly the reason you mentioned. In the long run, however, you still depend on the suppliers for the nuclear material. So you gain some independence because you don't need regular supplies, but the best solution would still be betting on renewable energies.
The panel said a complete phase-out of fossil fuel is needed for Taiwan to survive longer if a Chinese blockade cuts off its energy supply. But expert added that it's up to Taiwan's people to decide if it should bring back nuclear power or invest in renewable energy. Besides choosing energy sources that would better secure its power supply, the country also needs to be ready to accept help from other nations.
I fully expect these countries, probably led by the United States, to organize escort convoys to break the blockade and force China to decide, do you want war or do you allow this convoy to go through? When they offload the ships, offload the LNG and oil, and if it isn't a plan to organize it, to receive it, to distribute it, then it's not helping the people of Taiwan.
Taiwan shut down its last nuclear power plant in May and voted to stay nuclear-free after a referendum in August. The recent meeting between U.S. President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping at APEC brought a rare breakthrough, agreeing to pause export controls on rare earths for 1 year. Former U.S. Commerce Department official Kevin Wolf sits down with host Wenqi Yu in our news program DC Insiders to explain how unusual this situation is.
As we know, the recent Trump-Xi summit, one of the biggest focus was on the export control of rare earth. I think the world sort of breathed a relief that both sides agreed to a temporary sort of 1 year pause on this ban. However, there seems to be different readouts on both sides.
Oh, I don't have any inside knowledge as to Beijing, so I can't help you there. But I can put the agreement to withhold the imposition of controls on rare earths in connection with the U.S. decision to not impose controls on affiliates of listed entities. And that is completely novel. Nothing like that in the history of export controls has ever happened, where there was a specific action to impose controls by another country and our decision to not impose a control as part of a deal, an arrangement. And so there's a lot that we don't know what's going to happen. Just a couple of days ago, the Commerce Department published the implementation of its rule, suspending for 1 year rules that it had published in September, saying that any subsidiary, any entity owned 50% directly or indirectly by a sanctioned entity on the entity list was subject to exactly the same controls. Some estimates I saw in industry were that it would be as many as 20,000 or more actual entities that would, or that became for the month, subject to prohibitions on exports. And now those are suspended. And we've gone back to the day before September 29th in terms of what the rules are, at least for a year, or unless something in the interim happens that the deal goes south. And so in terms of the difference between the two sides, I have no idea. But in terms of the implications for it, it makes things really interesting from a compliance attorney's perspective.
How are export controls, since you're the expert on export controls, integrated into sort of the broader trade negotiations, and what risks and opportunities do they present for national security these days?
Historically, they've never had anything to do with trade talks. They've never, and what I mean by that is the system that we have today and the structure of it was basically born at the end of the Cold War as a non-proliferation system. That is, the U.S. and other producer nations, partners and allies, came together and said, what are the weapons of mass destruction, and what are the parts and the components and the technology and the software that are necessary to produce, develop, or use those things. So let's U.S. and other allies come together with all these technical experts and create lists of what those items are historically. And all export controls exist to serve a national security or foreign policy objective. And historically, that was the national security objective. I mean, for decades and decades. They were not something that was negotiable. And at every administration, Republican and Democrat, have said the two are unrelated. So to answer your question, how do they integrate with trade talks? They never have. This is all a grand experiment that we've never seen before. It's not necessarily per se bad. That's my point. And the reason for that creative new thinking is needed is that we're no longer in 1996. We're no longer in a straightforward world. We're no longer in a world where supply chain security is not so much of a policy issue for the United States. And economic security issues are far more complicated than that very sort of simplistic view. I mean, it's complicated, but simplistic in terms of objective view that's dominated for 30 years. And so starting really during the first Trump administration, there was in the community a fairly broad discussion about how should we be thinking about export controls more broadly than just those narrow, specific non-proliferation objectives.
That was former U.S. Commerce Department official Kevin Wolf. The whole conversation will be available soon on DC Insiders. The annual G20 summit is kicking off on Saturday in South Africa. The first time an African country will host the meeting. But several top leaders won't be there. Irene Lin has this report.
Dazzling dance performances mark the opening of this year's G20 summit in Johannesburg, South Africa, where world leaders are set to gather over the weekend. But some key figures have chosen not to attend for the first time in the event's history. Earlier this month, China's Xi Jinping and Russia's Vladimir Putin both declared they would send representatives instead. Meanwhile, the U.S. will skip the summit completely, citing allegations of the South African government mistreating its white minority. Johannesburg says the summit will still get things done, even with these absences.
You can call it whatever. Someone can call it a boycott, someone will call it non-attendance, but the reality is that they are not attending, they are not here. Our intentions are clear, is that we must achieve a leaders' declaration in South Africa, because the U.S. is absent from the G20 as a member. Therefore, there is nothing that precludes the members that are present to agree on a declaration.
It's the first time the diplomatic summit will be hosted in Africa. In the second year, the African Union will attend as a permanent G20 member. With a growing presence at the summit and the absence of the three major powers, South Africa plans to seize the opportunity to set an Africa-centered agenda. Climate disaster preparation, clean energy transition, and affordable debt solutions for low-income countries to pursue these projects, while continuing to supply critical minerals to the world.
How do we ensure that the people on the continent are benefiting from these minerals, and how are they serving the current energy crises that we have respectively within the continent? As you know, I think the statistics around 600 million Africans live without electricity. So how do we ensure that this transition is also able to speak to the development challenges?
Still, some worry that without Washington's attendance, the world's largest economy and historically a major financial backer of UN climate projects, it could be hard for other members to get the funding to meet those goals. But as U.S. President Donald Trump has rejected South Africa's agenda, the empty chair could actually give more room for other members to speak up.
Look, Trump not coming to South Africa may be the best thing that could happen to the G20. Imagine him or even J.D. Vance getting up on the stage here and do what Vance has done in Europe when he arrived there and insulted each and every foreign leader sitting in that room. They would have dominated to the extent that I think the other more sane voices could have been drowned out.
With so many top leaders missing out this time, Johannesburg will be looking to make the most of its historic hosting opportunity and achieve progress on some pressing issues for the continent. Dolphin Chen and Irene Lin for TaiwanPlus.
One person is dead and nearly 200 have been evacuated after a massive fire tore through a city in southern Japan. Starting around dinner time on Tuesday, the blaze spread quickly through an outlying area of Oita City, destroying 170 buildings. The fire took over 20 hours to control, and authorities are investigating the cause of the blaze. 13 people have been killed by bears in Japan since April. As several governments issued travel warnings, local authorities are taking matters into their own hands. Slan Shata looks at an unusual tech-driven approach.
A drone takes off over an orchard in Gifu Prefecture in central Japan. Using firecrackers and a loudspeaker, it barks like a dog, scaring off bears seen lurking in the woods.
Indeed, you don't really want to get hurt. I've had a few close calls myself, and then they glare at you, and yes, it's really scary when they actually look at you.
This high-tech solution has been deployed in Hida, a city that has seen 8 times as many bear sightings this fall, posing an ongoing threat to locals and tourists.
我们在做攻略的时候，就在小红书上看到有很多日本报道说有熊出没，好像因为今年的收成不太好，所以熊要下来找东西吃。然后呢，所以我们就准备了2个熊铃。
Across Japan, 220 people have been injured in bear attacks since April, a record spike in numbers. So far, 13 have been killed, with 7 deaths in October alone. The uptick has prompted the US, China, and the UK to issue travel advisories. And after a recent bear attack on a Spanish tourist, local governments are moving to respond.
When considering how to implement countermeasures, we examined whether to drive the bears away by hand or use dogs. Ultimately, we decided on a method that could be enacted immediately, and after careful consideration, we chose to use drones for bear deterrence.
As for bears, this is the first time we've used drones for bear deterrence. Recently, bear problems have become an issue in Japan, and this time we used the dog barking speakers to drive them away.
And the barking drone is just the first step. Officials are installing more warning signs and vowing to prevent more of these dangerous encounters.
You know, we are living in the mountain, and we are very, very familiar with the bears all the time. And then why can't I, avoid that in the first place? And then that was, pretty shameful for us. We are not gonna let that things happen again. Yeah, never.
With the bear population continuing to grow, the question remains, can Japan's high-tech efforts keep people safe and bears away? Scott Huang and Zalan Shata for TaiwanPlus.
Taiwan has secured its first medal at the Tokyo 2025 Deaflympics on Tuesday. Wei Yuze won silver in the men's decathlon, finishing with almost 6,000 points. This marks the country's first medal in the sport since 2009. Wei previously won gold in the men's long jump and silver in the men's 100 meters at the World Deaf Youth Games in Brazil last year. A couple in southern Taiwan has turned betel nut, which is usually chewed as a stimulant, into a source for dye for clothing and accessories. It took years to perfect their techniques, but they found ways to make over 500 shades from this single source. John Van Trieste has this story.
The clothing in this shop looks like it could come from any of the major fashion brands, but it's actually part of a social and ecological experiment. The cloth all comes from the rural interior of Taiwan's tropical far south, and all the dyes come from an unlikely source. The betel nut is best known in Asia as a stimulant that is chewed, leaving the mouth stained bright red and damaging one's health in the long term. But husband and wife entrepreneurs Wang Yifan and Huang Wanjie have found in them an excellent source of coloring, able to create a range of subtle hues that are perfect for fashion. The idea to start experimenting with betel nut pigments began in 2021 at the height of the COVID pandemic, when the couple moved from Taipei back to their hometown of Neipu in Pingdong County. Betel nut trees are plentiful there, but the idea of using them to dye cloth struck many locals as bizarre.
他们一个反应也会是，为什么要做这件事情？槟榔就是拿来割，跟拿来卖，跟拿来吃啊！你要去染它干嘛？染出来的布可以做什么用？做成的东西又可以卖多少钱？又可以卖给谁？他们其实都是对这东西有很多的问号。
Still, their research went on.
所以我们花了很多时间在做实验记录的研究，去发掘到底槟榔可以染出来多少的颜色，以及这个实验的记录是怎么可以控制的，还有就是它的色票是透过变色仪用科学的方式去验证它的颜色。
It took 3 years of experiments with different temperatures and water characteristics, But eventually, they'd worked out how to get 514 different shades from this one source, fallen betel nuts. But even now they know how to do it, extracting all these dyes is still hard work. The nuts need to dry out, then the cores need to be extracted, crushed, and boiled. The whole process takes 5 months. But the result is eco-friendly clothing, bags, pillowcases, and accessories, and the prospect of new jobs in a rural, aging part of the country. The couple later found out that they actually weren't the first to think of making dyes from betel nut. That honor goes to early modern Japan. Still, they're proud to have independently rediscovered the technique, and of making it perhaps a part of Taiwan's modern culture.
我觉得颜色可以当成一个文化的载体，然后我们就是用槟榔的红，然后跟土地的褐，然后在台湾的土地上长出台湾的颜色。
With a sense of both color and style, they're putting a local product onto the mass market and carving out a new niche in the fashion world. Leon Lin and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
And thank you for watching TaiwanPlus News. Head over to our website for more of our news reports and programs. Finally, check out nearly 1,000 drones lighting up the sky at the Dubai Air Show. I'm Eric Gao. Take care, and we'll see you next time.
For more stories from Taiwan and Osaka, download the TaiwanPlus app.